We are excited to share this rare interview of a World War II frontline fighter pilot. Bob Sharp flew the renowned P-47 Thunderbolt against German forces. In this episode, he will relate the good, bad, and ugly of being a fighter pilot at that time, as well as many other interesting stories.
When the draft came, I thought I would rather be in something other than the infantry, and I enlisted in the aviation cadet program at that time, and they gave us 10 hours in a Ronca, just a little light airplane, and from there we went to Santa Ana, and they gave us some what they called pre-flight, but there were no airplanes there. From there I went to Ryan Field in Arizona. That's down by Tucson, and got into PT-22. That's a single-engine airplane, what they call the primary trainer. That's the first airplane generally that the pilots start in. Then they sent me to Minderfield in Bakersfield, which is basic training. We flew the BT-13 there. That's a very noisy airplane. But it was the first almost getting you into a fighter, but not quite. You got a few hours at Minderfield there. From there, they sent me to Luke Field in Arizona. And Luke is by west of Phoenix. And from there, you flew the T-6, basically, and eventually they checked you out in a P-40, gave you 10 hours in a P-40. Which is the Flying Tigers airplane. That's where I graduated from on March of 1944. I was in what the class was called 44C. Luke Field was a pretty interesting place where you had aerial gunnery and you had ground gunnery, and you learned to fly formation and do some of the things that fighter pilots had to know eventually. And so when you graduated, you get your wings. They give you your silver wings, and they pin them on you, and they commission you. Most of the people became a second lieutenant then. Some became flight officers, which wasn't quite as good as being a second lieutenant. And I don't know why people were selected their flight officer rather than being a second lieutenant, but that's what happened to some people. It was kind of embarrassing, I think, to be a flight officer, but the second lieutenant was the first commissioned officer that you had. From there, they send you home on a leave. And after the leave, you get a batch of orders telling you where you're going then. They sent me to Harding Field in Louisiana, and that's where I met Don Evans. Jerry Kelly called us the Three Musketeers later on, but I don't know why they did that. But the three of us were from Utah. We were at Harding Field where we got training in the P-47. They checked us out, sold us, had a lot of gunnery. We used to fly a lot of gunnery over Lake Pontchartrain out of Louisiana there. They thought they were teaching you to be a combat pilot at the time. And a flight of four, it was all what they called fingertip formation. Any time four of you went someplace. So that happened at Harding Field in Louisiana. They figured I was ready to go kill people and break things. And well, when you get to a P-47 outfit like Harding was, there are no seats there for an instructor. Later on, they had two-seaters, but they didn't ever use that for training, as far as I know. They just used that to say take a passenger up and fly them around. But anyway, P-47, that's a big airplane. That was the biggest fighter at that time. It's pretty scary. Big, heavy, and you get in there and the crew chief starts it up for you and straps you in and shows you where your oxygen mask is and how to use the radio and stuff like that. You've had ground training in it on how to bail out, but that was in a classroom. Now you're in the airplane, and you get pretty nervous. You're there alone, and it's a huge airplane for a guy that just got out of Luke Field on a T-6. The crew chief does everything, starts you up and straps you in and pats you on the shoulder and says, "You got it. Good luck, sir." And then you taxi out, and you push the throttle forward, and and you get airborne. You get up and you fly around for a while until you become acclimated, I guess, to the airplane a bit. And you finally, after many times in the flight, in the airplane, you feel comfortable. And P-47 is a very comfortable airplane to fly and very responsive to the controls, very responsive. And it's a big blunderbuss. They call it the Jug. And it's got a wide landing gear, so you can't hardly ground loop the thing. That's what you worry about on landing, is ground looping. When you're flying a T-6, that was a problem with that airplane in advanced training. But in the Jug, when that thing's on the ground, it's solid. When you've cut the throttle and you're on the ground, you're solidly on the ground. Then from Harding, they sent us to New York and put us on a ship. We got on the Queen Elizabeth, an English ship. It carried generally 1,200 people or so, passengers in civilian time. I think they had something like 20,000 people on the ship when I went over. And that's an awful lot of people to have if they got hit by a sub. I think it was Wales we landed in finally. There were the 5 of us together. We stayed together from then on. Jerry, of course, was killed on his 8th mission. Jerry Kelly. He and I were like twins, actually. He and I were more alike than you can imagine. We liked everything the same. We liked the same movies. We liked the same food. We liked the same everything. Got similar scores on bowling and stuff like that. Jerry Kelly and I were just like 2 peas in a pod. And he got shot down on his 8th mission and was killed. And that was a little more than upsetting, but my gosh, you can't imagine what it's like to be in a combat situation where you go out on a mission and one guy didn't come back. And that's pretty upsetting, but the next thing you know, you're on another mission. When you're pretty new in the squadron, you fly the wing of the CO. And Major Hendricks was a CO of the, he was the operations officer, but he was a CO in the 397th Squadron that Jerry and I were in the 368th Fighter Group. When I went overseas, I thought, I'm not going to get through this. I'm going to die while I'm overseas. I'm going to die in this war, and I was sure I was going to die in that war. But Jerry went off, and he was on the wing of Major Hendricks. And as I understand it, they were strafing a train, and there were a lot of, that's what we did, close support. We strafed trains, cars, trucks, houses, people, anything that was moving, we strafed it. Later on, of course, we carried bombs too, a couple of bombs on each airplane, and we'd drop bombs, and we were there to kill people and break things, and that's what we tried to do. We were told to do it, and we did it. And I think about it every day. I don't know what got Jerry, but he called in and said, I got smoke in my cockpit, and never said anything else. I've got smoke in the cockpit, and that was it. And later on, they found out in the book Missing, they talk about that a bit. But that's how Jerry got killed. Whenever you go out on a mission, it's very arbitrary how you get on a mission board. You're scheduled for green 4. That's when you taxi out. You taxi out as a green 4. That's the green flight. Or you're on a red flight, you're on the blue flight, you're on the yellow flight. You're number 2, you're number 3, you're number 4, you never know. I had an airplane assigned to me at the time. I don't remember what it was, but you're on a trailer, they carry you and your chute out to the airplane, drop you off at your airplane as they go by the airplanes. You go get in your airplane, the crew chief straps you in and start engine. You get the announcement over the air, start engine, and you start engines, and then as they start taxiing out, you put yourself in the slot where you belong. If it's a red 4, you go out to the 4th airplane. If it's green 3, you go out in the 4th flight of number 3. And you all go out and taxi out and go out to the end of the runway and get ready for takeoff. And then somebody shoots the gun in the air or drops the flag or whatever it is. and the first two airplanes take off, then the next two airplanes take off, then the next two airplanes take off, then the next two airplanes take off. They go like that till they get all 8, 12, 16 airplanes off the ground, and the two that take off first, they go up and then they start a gradual turn, and as the airplanes take off, they fall into a formation as they go around they go around the airport at least once, and by the time they've gone around the whole airport, you may have all 16 airplanes together in four flights of four, and then you head out to the wherever the mission is. You bomb Nuremberg or whatever. You're going to bomb the airport at whatever. Or you're going to strafe the airport at whatever the mission is that you were briefed to do, you're going to do, and you're going to do it as a squadron, and you do it as individual airplanes in a squadron of maybe 8 or 12 or 16 airplanes. When you get formed and you start heading out to the mission on the course that gets you to the mission, and it's boredom. It's really boredom while you're over friendly territory, because you're just flying and you're staying in formation. So there's not much to do. You're just there checking instruments and stuff. If anybody aborts, they sometimes have a separate airplane ready to go to fill in the slot, but mostly you don't have that happen. But you go out, and once you get over enemy territory, then you got to be careful and start worrying about flak. And if you go over a flak area, you don't stay close in anymore. You spread out. You don't give them one target with 4 airplanes. You give them one airplane, one target, because they're shooting ack from the ground at you. We all go down as a kind of a whole squadron together, but 2 at a time, and we're spaced out quite a bit so that one ack shot will get more than one airplane. We don't want that to happen. And you may get hit going down. Anyway, you do your dive bombing or whatever, and then on the way home, you go down on the deck, down on the ground, and start shooting anything that moves. Trains, cars, people, houses. Houses don't move, but you shoot houses, towns, anything that moves. That's what you do in a war. Everybody's enemy out there. On that side of the bomb line, everybody's the enemy. You shoot anything you can hit, and you don't think about it. You're sent overseas to kill and break things, and that's what you do. And you generally don't think about it, except in my case, and 70 years later, I think about it and wonder what a stupid bunch of people we are to be out there doing what we're doing. But you're doing it, and they're doing it to us, and that's the stupidity of the whole shebang. When you get near the bomb line, which is getting back in friendly territory, then you form back up if there's anybody left, and they're generally you get through it. But you form back up and go back to your base and land, and then you go to a room in a shed someplace, and they debrief you and ask you what you did and who you shot down and what you saw out there, and were there any other airplanes in the area, and all that kind of stuff. And all the time you're strafing on the ground on the way coming home, there are probably Germans up here, and they're coming down to shoot you because they know you're about out of ammo, and you're heading home, and they come down to get you then. So then you got to keep watching back what's up there. It's hard to look back up there, but you try to look for what they call bogeys, because there are Germans out there. They got better airplanes than we have in some cases. They had German pilots that had many kills like that. You've heard about them and probably read about them in the news, but they were very famous, and we could read about it in the newspaper because they printed what they did too, and they would get back in the United States, and then the United States would tell us about these guys that are really aces. You can be an ace if you shoot down 5 enemy airplane. Well, these guys shoot down 300. Some of the German pilots are just fabulous pilots, and they had good airplanes. I'm very fortunate that I escaped. If you're jumped by an enemy airplane, you generally try to turn into them and try to get them in a what they call a Lufberry circle. You try to get on their tail, and they try to get on yours. And there's nothing as scary as looking over your shoulder and seeing a 109 with a cannon doing this, blinking. And that's scary. And that happened to me. It didn't hit me, but got on my tail. And the only way, what you can do is just what they call split S. Just roll over and head down, and try to outrun him, or you can't outgun him because you're on your tail. But it's a rat race from then on, and everybody. It used to be when I was there, a lot of times the sky was just basically filled with people, airplanes, trying to get on the tail of another airplane, and shooting, and bullets all over the place. And you don't see the bullets, but the 109 had a cannon shooting out the front. That's pretty scary if they're on your tail. And you try to get on their tail, and they try to get on your tail. And if you can get on theirs, you try to shoot them down. And if you're a good shot, you can get them. But I never got any kills. I never had any confirmed. I got a couple, but I never had any confirmed. I know every airplane had a gun camera, and when you got back on the ground, they checked the gun camera film, and I never had any confirmed kills. But I did shoot down a couple of airplanes. The one that I remember mostly, I wasn't a very good pilot, but I was a good gunner. Anytime we ever had shot skeet or did gunnery on the ground, or anytime I ever fired a shot against anybody, I was always almost the best. But I was not a good pilot particularly. There were guys that could fly rings around me in my own squadron, and that's not very good to not be a very good pilot. But I never saw myself as a good pilot. But over there in Germany, when I was there, the one that I got, that I know I shot the guy down. There's no question about it. He got enough hits that I know I shot him down. His airplane was just speckling like this with tracers that I hit him with. Every fourth round or something was a tracer bullet. You could see the tracer go, and then there was 4 rounds that you don't see. And his airplane just speckled from left to right with tracers. So when a tracer hit him, I'm sure somebody else hit him or something else hit him. And I'm sure he did not fly very long after I hit him. But that's the only one that I really recall good. But I think I got another one, but I don't have any camera film. My camera didn't work, and I don't have any confirmation of any at all. Well, the only ones that we were flying against were the 190, the FW-190, and the ME-109. Those were the 2 German airplanes. I can't tell you what I got, what I hit them with, or which one I shot down. I can't tell you. All I saw was the rear end of the airplane. I had a couple of holes in the airplane when I got back, but I don't know what did it. Whether it was a ground fire, some guy with a pistol, or what. I don't know what did it. But just a little hole in the airplane someplace. Fortunately, it didn't hit the engine or anything. So I don't really know. Sometimes we drop bombs on our own people, and you find that out later. They used to put what they called cerise panels, really very colorful panels, on our tanks and our cars and our stuff, so that we would not shoot our own people. But if you saw a car and you were in enemy territory and it didn't have a Cerise panel on the top of it, you'd try to shoot it. You'd do your best to shoot it, and they'd do their best to shoot you. And they could throw a rock up. You were low enough, they could throw a rock up and hit you. I had come home one time with one of the cylinders gone on the engine, but it brought me home. The Jug was very good doing that. It could kind of fly without oil for a while, and the Jug was called a juggernaut, but it could take a real beating and still bring you home most of the time. A lot of times it didn't. Like Kelly, Jerry Kelly did not come home when he got hit. But you never know about that. You still, when you get on the mission schedule, you go out and get in the airplane and you go in the order that you're scheduled. You just go do it. I never saw anybody back out of any of that. I know I thought about backing out a lot of times, because especially in an air-to-air combat situation, a lot of times it gets so hairy you do back out. You hit head for the ground and head for home with full throttle as best you can. Get out of there, because if you stick around, you're outnumbered. One time on one mission, we went out. We had 12 airplanes, as I remember. 2 of them aborted, or one aborted, and his wingman went with him on takeoff. They stopped their takeoff, and something happened. They got a red light on the engine or something, and so they aborted the flight. Then that was left 10. So we went out on a mission. I was supposed to have 12, had 10 airplanes, and we got in we were jumped by some enemy aircraft, and we were just going around and round and round, and we lost 6 airplanes out of the 10. That was about as hairy as it could get. I was one that got home, and I don't know why. Maybe because it looked like we were just getting outnumbered, and you head for the deck and go home. And by the time when they jump you, you're no longer a 10 airplane squadron. You're 10 single airplanes fighting for your life, is what it amounts to. You break up in 2s first, so you become in 10. You become 5 groups of 2. But eventually they get broken up because of the horrendous situation. And then you end up as 10 separate airplanes with maybe 60 Germans in the area with you. And so you do what you have to do. If you can get on one of them and take them out, you do it. If it looks like I hit the deck and go home, you try to do that too. Because staying there is a certain death. And of that 10 that stayed there were 6 of them shot down. And that was about the worst. The worst one that I can ever remember is almost losing the whole squadron that one day. I had a kind of a girlfriend in high school, and her name was Louise Cairo. She was just a little gal, but she was a cute little gal, and we were friendly, but we were not in today's friendly. We were great friends. We played tennis together occasionally. Anyway, her nickname was Little Egypt, Little Egypt, because it was Cairo. Her name was Cairo, and she had a couple of brothers that were in high school with me, but I named my airplane Little Egypt. And somebody painted Little Egypt on the nose of my airplane. It wasn't very good painting. It wasn't one of these hot, risque things like you see a lot of. It was just the name Little Egypt, and that's what I had on my airplane. And she and I wrote to each other while I was overseas. She was a school teacher, and I don't know. When I got home, I don't remember. I think I dated her once when I got home, but then I met my wife. When we went overseas, we were expected to fly 100 missions, and the war ended when I had 78. In the war in Europe, they weren't all combat missions. I mean, they were all combat missions, but they weren't all hair raisers. There were only a few hair raisers, but they were all counted as combat missions. When you get in an airplane and cross the bomb line and do something, they counted that as a combat mission. But I was supposed to do 100, but the war ended before I got to 100. I had friends there that had done 100, had gone home, and had come back and were working on their next 100. So there are a lot of guys that had a lot more time than I had, a lot more missions than I had. I was just a little guy in a big ocean. Our last base that we were at was at Nuremberg. That's where they had the trials, Nuremberg, Germany, where after the war they had these trials and committed the Germans to death and all that kind of stuff. But Nuremberg was a town, and it had an airfield, and had a ball field and all that. And I can remember sitting in the stands at Nuremberg, but they sent us to Nuremberg, and we took over a town there. That's what we did, which to me today is still annoying. We would take over a town, buy an airfield, and take over the houses in the town. And we would move our people in the house and boot the people who were in the house out of the house. So we would go in a fully staffed house where the piano is and the dishes and the dining room tables and all the linens and all that. We would take over this house and we would move our people in. 4 or 5 people would go and live in that house, and as long as we were at that air base. And that always bothered me, but that's what we did. War is not a good thing. Well, Nuremberg was my last station, and after Nuremberg, they cut orders for me to go home. And on my way home, I knew I was headed for Japan, because they were flying jugs over there too. And I knew I was headed for Japan, and that wasn't very, very nice. But anyway, they put me on a ship and sent me home. But on my way home, I guess they dropped a bomb, as I recall, and the war in Japan ended. And that's why I voted for Truman, because he kept me from going over to Japan to suffer, bleed, and die, because I knew I would not make it out of there. If I had to go there, I knew I would not make it out. Of course, I thought that with Germany too, and that never happened. And here I am, 100 years old still, and I'm surprised at that. I never knew that would happen. When I got home, I missed flying quite a bit, and they opened up a flying squadron at the municipal airport in Salt Lake, and we're starting the 191st Squadron, and they were flying Mustang 51. I'd never flown a Mustang, but they were flying a Mustang. And so I went out there and got an interview. And the guy that interviewed me was the guy that was on the radio in Hawaii when the Japanese attacked Hawaii. I can't remember his name right now. He was a colonel when I knew him when he interviewed me for the National Guard. They interviewed me and they accepted me in the National Guard at Utah. And I was one of the first ones to get into that squadron. And I was in there flying while I was going to school in Salt Lake. And We did a lot of what they call firepower demonstrations. We used to, maybe to 8, 12, whatever airplanes they wanted. We would go and fly across the country to Texas or someplace where they had a lot of infantry people training to be in the Army. And we would go there and put on a demonstration on what fighter planes could do to support them in the war. We would dive bomb and we would strafe targets that they put out in the field. And these infantry guys would be sitting in the stands. It's almost like watching a ball game. They would watch us strafe and dive bomb and drop napalm and all that kind of stuff. And we would fly around the country doing that. We would check out tennis rackets at the base we were in and play tennis. So we had a lot of fun doing that, going around the country playing tennis. I got 1,100 hours in the Mustang, as a matter of fact, doing that. And then later on, some of the guys in there were ex-P-38 people, and some were ex-JUG people like me. A lot of them were 51 people. In fact, they named the base in Salt Lake after one of the guys that I used to play tennis with, Roland Wright. If you know the municipal airport at Salt Lake, they call it the Roland Wright, whatever, the National Guard part of it anyway. I used to play tennis with him all the time. He was a member of the church and very active in the church. We just flew all over the country, dropping bombs and playing tennis. But that was kind of an interesting experience. The other guy I played tennis with was Perry Greenwood. He became the commanding general of the base, the guard base, after Wright. When Wright retired, Perry Greenwood became the commanding general of that, as I recall. That's what we did in the guard. So it's not all bad stuff. However, when I was in the guard, we would lose 2 pilots every year, and we were not fighting a war either. We would lose a couple of guys every year in an airplane accident of some kind. So it wasn't all fun and games. It was still kind of hazardous to your health if you weren't pretty careful. Most of the guards, I think, had 51s at that time. I think they're still flying in some of them, but the 51 was a real good fighter plane for that era. Later on, when I went to work for Lockheed, worked there 34 years. I was in flight tests, but I wasn't a test pilot. I did data work, but I was in there for a long time. But in the Guard in Salt Lake, they checked us out in the F-86, which was the Sabre. That was that jet airplane that flew in Korea. And that was a very nice airplane. Very comfortable, very responsive, very nice airplane. And when I came to California, my CO up there in Utah talked to the CO down here in California, and they picked me up in California and let me join their Guard unit down here in California. So I flew with the California Guard for a while too, and that was in F-86s. I was flying the T-Bird when I quit flying. T-Bird is like an F-80, only it's a 2-seater. And we used to use the T-Bird in the Guard as a tow for the target. I would fly either a 51 or a JUG at the time, but we would tow the target with a T-33. And the target is a 4x20 screen door. And you would shoot at that. 4 airplanes at a time would shoot at that. Not at a time, but a flight of 4 would go up to shoot at the target. They painted the nose of the ammunition so that when it went through the screen, it would leave the colored paint on the screen. And when it got on the ground, they could count how many hits you got on the screen. And so that's what we used to do. And we use the T-33 to tow the target, and you would either be in the flight of 4 or you would be towing a target. And I quit flying when I was towing the target one time because 2 of the guys that were flying in the flight One guy got out of position and ran into the other one, and both of them were killed. And it was just off the wing of the tow ship, which I was flying. And I looked out and I watched them go together. And that made such an impression on me. And I just, right then, I decided I was going to quit flying. Because every year we would lose two guys, it seemed like, and for one reason or another. And we just lost our two for that year. And I figure I better get out of here or I'm not going to see my grandkids grow up. They were flying F-86s, the Sabre, coming off the perch from up here and was just getting ready to shoot. His name was Bill O'Wesney. And the other guy was named Bill Modes, and he was pretty new in fight. You're supposed to shoot at the target, cross over the target, pull up, and go back up in the perch and get ready to come down again. So that the four airplanes are up here, ready to shoot, pulling off the target, or getting back up on the perch. That's where the four airplanes are supposed to be. Well, when this one was just about ready to shoot, Bill Modes, this is O'Wesney, this was Modes, instead of pulling up outside the target, he crossed over inside the target and went right in front of O'Wesney. And O'Wesney hit him dead center like that. And both of them, of course, they just big balls of fire. And that's what I saw. When I was looking at him, I saw him about like that. And I thought, this is going to be close. That's what I thought. That went through my mind. And then they went together like that. And they exploded, and my gosh, you can't believe it. And then I decided right then I was going to quit flying. And I was shaking like this. The odd thing was, a guy in the back seat of the T-Bird that I was flying was the brother of Bill Modes, who was also in our squadron. And he saw his brother die. He watched his brother die. He didn't know his brother was there. In fact, he started to cry, and he said, "That's my brother." I said, "No, that wasn't him. That wasn't him. Don't worry, that wasn't him, but it was him." And he was crying all the way back to the base, and I could hardly fly the airplane. I was so upset, but I had to take the airplane back, and I took it back to the base and dropped the target, and walked away, and never. Well, I had to fly again. I had to take a F-86 back home, back to the airport from there, because I flew one over. I had to take one back. So that was basically my last flight, as I recall, is flying that airplane back to the base. And boy, was it nervous time getting in an airplane. And that's when I quit flying. The fact that I've reached 100 and have quite a large family. I don't know, it's up in the 30s, I guess now, of grandchildren and stuff. That's pretty good. The fact that I was married for 74 years and to one woman, I think that was pretty interesting. And I was a scoutmaster for 5 years when I was in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I did work for Lockheed for 35 years. They hired me to go to flight tests, and I thought I was going to go to flight tests and be flying with the flight test, because that's basically what I could do, because they knew I was a former fighter pilot in the war. And when I got down there, I found out that I had been hired in at flight data analysis. That's putting points on a piece of paper and drawing lines through the points. My life has been very, very kind of interesting in a lot of ways, and a lot of fun, and a good family, and I've made a lot of friends in and out of the service.
Robert Sharp stopped flying after serving in the California Air National Guard. He became an aerospace engineer and worked at Lockheed for 35 years. He worked on the development of the F-104, SR-71, and L-1011. He was married for 74 years to Jacqueline Devereaux and raised 3 children with her in California. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more exciting upcoming episodes.